Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focused Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. We use HCI certification programs as well as non-certified HRBP MBA Masterclass to give your team a laser focus on the business and strategy. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series where we bring together global leaders, innovators, disruptors to exchange ideas and thoughts. Today, our guest is Dr. Lipi Roy, internal medicine physician, board certified in addiction medicine, international speaker, media medical commentator, as well as the host of a YouTube series, Health, Humor, and Harmony. She currently serves as the medical director at Housing Works in New York City, as well as a clinical assistant professor at NYU Langone Health. During the pandemic, she treated patients with opioid use disorders at a harm reduction clinic located in Bronx, New York. Dr. Roy, welcome, and glad to have you here.
Hello, Ron. How are you doing? It's so good to see you, my friend.
So good to see you. Last time we were together was at your birthday party in New York, hanging out a little bit, so it's cool. It's cool.
And the first time we met was at, you kindly treated me to lunch at an Indian restaurant in New York City.
Yes, that was cool. Yeah, that was good. So, I'm so glad to have you here because I've watched your work. I've seen you on the TV stations and commentating. It's an amazing career. So walk us through your career since medical school. And how did you reach this point that you're at now in your career?
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity, Ron. I'm so impressed with you and your career and what you're doing with the CEO series. Wow, fascinating. I think it's been an atypical kind of journey, and everyone's journey is relatively unique. But in my case, it certainly has been. Even my journey before I even got to medical school was unusual. I mean, I worked for a big pharma. I did my master's in neurophysiology. Then I worked for a big pharma. I went to England and Sweden. And then one day I presented my data, my work at the Society for Neuroscience meeting in New Orleans. And I did some research, found out that Tulane University had a 4-year MD and MPH program, applied, got in, and it completely changed the trajectory of my career. And so my mom and dad, who are in Toronto, they're like, okay, Lipi, finally, you'll be in one city for 4 years. And then at the start of second year med school, this phenomenon called Hurricane Katrina happened. Evacuated New Orleans to Houston, Texas for 9 months. Came back to a very different New Orleans, started volunteering at a grassroots clinic where I met New Orleans residents, many from the 9th Ward that was so heavily hit. But that's when I really first learned about public health and what it means to serve the underserved. So that really sparked my interest. And so miraculously was able to complete medical school, my MD and my master's in public health in 4 years on time, thanks to the heroic efforts of several classmates and faculty. And then I did my residency in internal medicine at Duke Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina. Very, very intense program. I mean, Duke Medicine and Duke Surgery are really some of the toughest in the country, if not the world. But I learned from tremendous faculty. But of course, they always teach you that you're number one in first year of medical school. They teach you that your best teacher will be your patients. And so, and then, but actually, and even at second year of residency in January, I believe, Sure, I can't remember the year, 2010, I believe. The earthquake in Haiti happened. And now at this point, unlike when I was a medical student, now I have a medical degree and I have medical training. So I really wanted to help. But at the time, Duke was really only sending highly specialized people, orthopedic surgeons and trauma surgeons and infectious disease doctors. Sorry, not orthopedic, trauma surgeons. But, over time, as, that expression, when it rains, it pours. So by about March and April, many organizations were seeking to send people. So I was able to go over to Haiti and provide some medical relief to people who really lost everything, but had a lot of chronic conditions that were ignored for several months.
Wow.
And then I completed residency, and then I started working, and I wanted to move closer to my family who are in Toronto. So I started looking for jobs in the Northeast, because when you're in the South for 7 years, as wonderful as an experience that was for my training, it's hard to visit your family when you're working 80 to 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
And so then I started. I really found a job as a primary care physician to Boston homeless men and women, and I was also working at Massachusetts General Hospital, and then the MGH is a Harvard teaching hospital, so I got to teach at Harvard as well. So not a bad gig for somebody right out of residency. So I did that for 5 years, and we discovered about a year and a half in that the leading cause of death amongst Boston's homeless population, my patients, was drug overdose. And that's how I fell into the world of addiction medicine. And let me tell you, they don't teach you this stuff in medical school or residency. So I'm so glad I learned it. And again, I just did a lot of listened to my patients. I listened to psychologists and substance use counselors. And then I got board certified in addiction medicine. And at that point, I started doing some media work. I started tweeting about all these amazing scientists and doctors at Mass General, at Harvard. And one day, one of the PR people at Mass General emailed me saying, Dr. Roy, we noticed that you tweet a lot. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. And he followed that up by saying, and we love it. In fact, we'd like to invite you to our inaugural social media medicine panel. And that's what led to this wonderful relationship that I've had in terms of they connected me to tons of reporters and journalists who are always seeking doctors. And eventually, after a few years, my colleagues, a few of the trusted ones, said, Lipi, if you're really serious about medicine and media and entertainment, you need to move to New York. And that's when I moved to New York in 2016. Okay. First job was working at Rikers Island, and then addiction treatment centers, and now here at Housing Works.
Yeah. Well, that always intrigued me because, normally, and I don't want to generalize this, but normally if a person goes to school for a doctor, you're dealing with a certain clientele, you're dealing with a certain demographic group, good life, good salary, all those kind of things. But when I listened to you tell your story, you looked at the underserved, and the underserved was your connection to doing what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. The homeless people that are in jails or whatever it is. Normally, a person that goes to school for a doctor would not look for that, but it was amazing how you made that transition.
Yeah, well, thank you for raising that. I've now looking back on my career thus far, I take tremendous pride in my the opportunities that have been presented my way. I never really sought them out, Ron, and I think that's a key message that I try to share with a lot of trainees and people that are entering certainly medicine, but frankly any field. Just keep an open mind to whatever opportunities may come your way. You never know, as long as it's something that's consistent or aligned with your own personal and professional and academic mission. But it has to be something that, sometimes it's okay to have a bit of a fear, and moving towards the fear. You of all people know, as such a successful entrepreneur, go towards the unknown and let it broaden and open your mind and your heart. I mean, serving the underserved has truly made me not only a better doctor and provider and clinician, but really, frankly, a better human being, a better family member, a better friend. And I wish now in my career, I wish I did more advocacy and activism and in terms of representing people whose voices aren't heard.
So one of the key points you mentioned, I just wrote that down. The best teacher is your patient.
Yeah.
Masterful. So, because I do organizational consulting, you listen. You said listen to your patients, listen to your clients, listen to them. And so when I say listen, I mean really listening, not listening for a pause, which is what we do sometimes.
Well, you know, I remind young students, trainees, medicine, we are in the customer service field. We just don't call them customers, we call them patients.
Okay.
And it would really serve, my profession a lot better if we just didn't lose sight of that. Because as I said, they teach you on day one of medical school that your most important teacher is your patient.
Wow.
Senior attendings of mine always said, get a good history, know what questions to ask, and just listen. Even though they teach us that first day of med school, Ron, the truth is studies show that even though a doctor sees a patient in clinic, comes to their office and says, tell me what brings you by, tell me why you're here.
Yeah.
Even though they open with that invitation, studies show that doctors then interrupt within the first 14 to 18 seconds.
So I'm asking you, but then I'm going to interrupt and give you my version.
See, you're a bad patient. No, you're a bad doctor. No, but I mean, it's human nature. I get it, to interrupt and you want to know more. But so doctors lose sight of that, right? And it's very important for us to just let them tell their story. They're going to tell you actually what their diagnosis is, how to treat it. I mean, you'll probably come up with a treatment plan, but we just interrupt too often. We don't let them tell their story in the way they want to tell it.
Yeah. I need to get you on the stage at a leadership development conference because everything you said is what I've been saying, but I don't have the credentials that you have for the professional capacity to say, you need to listen more. You need to listen to your people. You need to listen to your workforce more, as opposed to always coming up with solutions and you never ask them.
Well, people like you and I've been told, at least certainly, I went to some drug policy advocacy meeting, and the room was filled with a lot of MDs and PhDs, as well as lawyers and activists and other policymakers. And I remember the host saying, I really want to have conversation, engaging dialogue, but I asked that the MDs and PhDs, she was a PhD herself, she's like, we take up a lot of space. So I ask that you MD and PhDs hold off on your questions so we can create space for other people. And, I'll probably say the same for like CEOs and leaders like you, Ron, and people like me that are in leadership positions or who have certain letters behind their name. I think we can come across as maybe sometimes as a little intimidating. And I think we need to be intentional and mindful of letting all voices be heard. Now, that said, I've also experienced the opposite where forget the letters behind my name. If I'm seen still primarily as a woman and a woman of color, and there are other people that are still going to swoop in and control the room. And so that's when I still need to find a way to speak up and have my voice heard. So I have to, watch the room and see where I am at.
Yeah, but the entire concept you talked about, the doctor-patient relationship, we could also extend that back inside of organizations. And I do a lot of work with CEOs and leadership teams across the globe. And I find sometimes they just, for some reason, they just don't want to listen. And when you mentioned the initials behind the name, I always use that. I said, just because you have the initials VP, MD, SVP, EVP, build a relationship, talk to people, listen to people.
It's all about relationships, Ron. I wish I knew today. I wish I knew it like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It would have saved me so much heartache, But that's life, right? That's the purpose, I think, of going through these experiences, these ups and downs. I'm sure you probably feel the same way, but often you learn more from your adversity, the challenges, the failures. We tend to, especially high achieving people like maybe you and me, we tend to always want to just get better and achieve. But it's the adversity that really makes you who you are. And you're absolutely right, Ron. Like, there's so much overlap in terms of what folks like you do and what folks like I do, because at the core of it, it's dealing with people, very, diverse people who have their own agenda. So that's a lesson I had to learn when taking care of homeless men and women. They would come into my clinic. My clinic would be embedded in homeless shelters. But I would start, oh, I'm the doctor. I've got the agenda. You have to do what I'm telling you to do. I need to check your hemoglobin A1C. You need to get a colonoscopy, and I got to, check your blood pressure. But meanwhile, they are coming in with their own list of things. All they want, they don't need a refill. They don't want a refill of their list. That's the last thing on their mind. They want socks. They want food stamps. They want somebody to talk to about getting a job. And I'm like, well, I'm a doctor. I don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you come to realize, wait a second, it's all part of health, right? So, and learning how to engage in those conversations, that's where the listening comes in, right? And you're not going to, he or she is not going to do a damn thing that you tell them unless they feel heard. And the same thing applies to what you do and in all leaderships and business sectors.
Yeah. You have to connect. You mentioned, working with the homeless population. And again, I go back to someone that's going to school for a doctor to get the MD and, MPA or whatever initials you have. You probably would, if you probably were to tell your parents, they said, well, I want to work in homeless shelters. I want to work for addiction recovery, whatever it is. It was, well, they can't invest in that. That's a unique position for someone coming out of medical school, and your specialty now, and in other words, you're known as a noted expert as it relates to those two populations that you probably would never have thought of when you first signed up for medical school. Is that correct?
Short answer is 100% agree. You're right. Even to this day, look, I have the most wonderful, I've been blessed. I have a wonderful mother and father who to this day offer unconditional support. I would not be here if it weren't for them.
Excuse me, I need to interrupt you. Tell him happy birthday, because his birthday was it this past?
My father's birthday was yesterday, December 1st.
December 1st. Tell him I said happy birthday. I saw it.
You are so sweet. Well, they'll be watching, so don't worry. You've already said happy birthday. Yes, my wonderful father, Mr. Lipi Roy. Talk about support. Let me just quickly add there, Ron, especially as a girl and the daughter of immigrants from India, having that unconditional support from a young age. First of all, my father just always wanted to have a daughter. And then Neil, my brother, was born. They like him too. But, he always wanted a daughter. And I remember when I was young, teenager, university, he would say things like, Lippy, I don't ever want you to be financially dependent on a man. I want you to always be financially independent. And I thought to myself, yeah, whatever, I'll have a job, whatever. It never occurred to me what that really meant, because my father came from a country where it still is very paternalistic, very patriarchal. He made a decision to leave right after college and work and live abroad. But I think, and he also, my father's mother died when he was 8 years old. So I have a feeling, and to this day, he has such stark memories of his mother. Tears swell up in his eyes when thinking about his mother and how loving she was. But I think that kind of loss has a profound effect on you. And I will say, I am who I am in large part. My mother too, don't get me wrong. She's a fierce leader, but my father, in terms of the ambition and the drive that I have, that's in large part because of the support from my dad. But, it's when they see me on television doing YouTube videos, but talking to, on MSNBC and NBC News and all these networks doing radio, always about health. I'm always talking about public health and medicine. My mom, one day she said to me years ago, Lippy, she called me, so when are you going to become a real doctor again? So, because their idea of what a doctor is somebody, packs their medicine bag, goes to a clinic, goes to the hospital, works 8-10 hours, and then comes back home. I get it, right? I come from a long line of doctors and surgeons, and that's what they understand. But the truth is, Ron, that these letters behind my name, particularly MD and the MPH, Master in Public Health, they've afforded so many other opportunities because I can apply this wonderful training that I received and these unique experiences in shelters and jails and working in Haiti and internationally. I can now apply this in so many other ways, in so many other sectors. And that's a lot of doctors, and I'm sure you already know this, Ron, they're already entrepreneurs. They're already pursuing entrepreneurial paths, or they're working in clinical medicine kind of with an entrepreneurial spirit. So that's the short answer, but my mom and dad are proud of me.
Yeah. Well, you know what you were just saying about, the careers and, you get these degrees and all these. I know so many lawyers who are doing not legal work. They're doing something else. I know doctors like yourself who were in that space as the MD with the office hours or whatever it is. And now they're doing something else.
You're 1000% right. I mean, look, I tell trainees this. I'm like, first of all, the first thing I say is, like, if your goal is strictly financial, you just want to reap in as much money as possible, which is great, as long as you recognize that, I really wouldn't recommend the medical route. You'll definitely make money, but it's a long, circuitous route, right?
Yeah.
I mean, medicine is all about delayed gratification, right? Look, think about all the years of school I've been at. I mean, I have 4 degrees after my name, just the medical undergrad, medical school, residency training, fellowship. It's a long haul. So you have to, the expression medicine is a calling. Almost most people who go into medicine do it because there's something innately in them that drives them towards doing this. Now, that said, medicine, like, you can pursue so many other paths. Yes, clinical medicine, direct patient care, academic medicine, working your way up within academic hospital settings, becoming a chief chair. You can go into global health, public health. You can go into business, go into like HMO and venture capitalism. You can do so many different things. I'm probably forgetting 90 other things that you can do, and you can go into scientific research, open up a lab, work at the NIH. It is a blessing, Ron, to have the training that I do. You just have to have the will and ask a few questions. Doctors are mostly very curious by nature, and they tend to be pretty driven people, which, by the way, can also be a bad thing, right? Because we have a difficulty saying no. We want to say yes. We want to help. It's also associated with a lot of high rates of burnout. And burnout is not something specific just to medicine, but we unfortunately know it too well. And COVID, unfortunately, exposed a lot of that. But there's a lot of opportunities. We just have to be intentional about it and really ultimately focus on our own self-care. And again, that's taken me years to discover and realize.
Yeah, I find it so amazing because, getting up on Monday morning is a challenge if you don't enjoy what you do. And I'm thinking, in knowing your background and us talking over the years, and to get up and I'm going to a homeless population for 3/4 of the day, or I'm going to the jail for a half day. How do you stay connected and grounded?
Yeah.
Let me just mention this. I read a research report, and it was called Sunday Night Angst. And Sunday Night Angst is that I'm sitting around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the Sunday, and I'm waiting for Monday morning, and and I have to go through dealing with this every Sunday. What's your secret?
Well, it's a very open secret. The bottom line is you have to enjoy the work. You have to find meaning in the work. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that every day will be flawless and perfect, because I feel like we need to eliminate that P word from our vocabulary, this word perfection, because that is really the downfall, especially to a lot of high achieving people who are very driven. Again, a lot of physicians and surgeons are like that. I think it's fine to strive towards being the best that you can be and learning and improving every day. But this idea of perfection, it really causes a lot of anxiety, disappointment. So you gotta find some aspect of your job that you truly enjoy, that makes you get up that Monday morning when it's minus 20 and there's like 10 feet of snow, or it's 104. You have to enjoy your colleagues. In my case, truly want to meet new patients or connect with the patients you've been taking care of or your clients, and understand that change does not happen instantaneously. Certainly not in my field, right? Building relationships, particularly amongst a community, a population who tends to be very untrustworthy of authority, right? Most homeless men and women, people who've been in and out of jails, they do not trust people in positions of authority, cops, doctors, administrators. So the onus is on me to build that trust, to earn that trust. But once you do it, Ron, there is nothing like it. My patients, some of them they're so fiercely protective of me. They don't want to disappoint me. The ones that have quit smoking, but then they start again, or they quit heroin, but they relapse and start using again. Dr. Roy, I'm so sorry. I did use 2 times this past week. I'm like, you don't have to apologize. You know what I mean? Like that, but that's because the trust that we built.
Yeah. So how can we duplicate you in all the medical schools across the globe? How can we duplicate you in all the CEOs across the globe? Because she's onto something here. And I think we all can learn from that.
First of all, that's so sweet. We also need to, if you're going to duplicate Lipi Roy, you got to duplicate Ron Thomas, and we'll be a tag team, okay? With your skills and my skills, we will it'll be awesome. Well, thank you. I'm very deeply touched that you said that. I stand on the shoulders of giants, Ron. And by the way, that includes not only my own medical mentors, but my patients. Yeah. Some of them sadly are no longer alive today. That's also what drives me, Ron. I've identified several key problems, gaps in knowledge, not only amongst doctors and medical professionals, but gaps amongst the general public. And I've identified a way of how I can fill those gaps. And that's what really drives me, Ron. When I see injustice, whether that be people who are dying needlessly because of drug overdose, people who are dying or suffering because of domestic violence, people who are not getting the reproductive health care they need, people because they're caught up in the criminal justice system when they have mental illness or drug problems. You know what I mean? Like, we have solutions to these problems, and we just need to work together. I'm not going to be the one who can solely solve these problems, but I know how we can work together, bringing all these different sectors together. We have the tools exist, Ron. It's about working collaboratively and just finding the tools to do it. It's actually not that hard, but it takes a concerted effort. It takes funding. It takes the will, Ron. It's, as my father has said to me all my life, there's a will, there's a way. You have to really want to solve something. And in this country, Ron, as you know, we live in the wealthiest nation in the world. Money is very, very rarely the problem. Money's not the obstacle. It's having the will.
It's having the will of whether we distribute that across the spectrum of all the ills that we're facing. When you mention consult to your patients, consult to the governing bodies or whatever it is. And that's one of the concepts I teach in leadership development. We have to consult and collaborate. You consult with people and you listen. That comes back to, what you were saying in the beginning, because people sit and watch the news and you'll see a raid on a drug den and they lock people up, or you see people homeless. People see the news and they click onto something it does not even connect. But this is a part of society and we should all be concerned. This is my vision of it. We should all be concerned. What little piece can I do to help?
I'm so glad you raised that point. Like that's a part of the problem, this disconnect. People think, well, they're homeless. I mean, that doesn't affect me, right? Can I share with you, Ron, a lesson that I learned many from taking care of homeless or unhoused men and women. Many of them had advanced degrees. I took care of people who had law degrees, PhDs. Many came from very stable homes. Many did not. Many came from very traumatized histories. But that's the key, right? You can never predict what's going to happen to you or me tomorrow, later this afternoon, this evening. You know what I mean? Look, COVID-19, perfect example, right? If you don't have your health, nothing else matters, right? This little microscopic virus called SARS-CoV-2 completely changed our lives almost overnight, right? Similarly, just like we couldn't predict that, similarly, we have no way of predicting what's going to happen, but let's work in an environment where we're supporting each other, right? I've had patients who've their houses burned down. They became unemployed. They just didn't have, they started drinking a little bit too much, and it became an addiction. People who drink and use drugs, that almost always do so to self-medicate their underlying pain and trauma. This is why, addiction, substance use disorders is something that we need to take very seriously. Your clients, most of my colleagues may not be able to relate to being addicted to heroin, but they can relate to having a massive amount of stress. They can relate to losing a family member or having a good friend who's in the hospital. They can relate to extremely stressful, tense emotions, and they can relate to anger, right? These are universal, Ron. And we need to be able to create an environment, a support system where we take care of one another. And should somebody want to develop a substance use disorder, let's get them the care that they need and deserve, the evidence-based treatment that they need and deserve. And mental illness like depression, anxiety, PTSD goes hand in hand often with substance use disorders because of the underlying kind of pain and trauma that's not being addressed. So that to me, Ron, is universal. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. I was laughing because I said, you're using all the words I use, evidence-based. You just consulting, collaborate, all the things. You're using all the same things I'm using. You're a doctor, and this is what you're talking about, and this is what I try and instill with clients. I had a call early this morning with a group out of Vietnam because I'm headed to Vietnam in a couple of weeks, and I'm trying to get them to understand listening and all these things. And it's like I was talking in the wind. They did not hear anything I said, and they still kept coming back to the same thing. So I said, you know what? Fine, we can do it that way. But you know what? I was telling my assistant, I said, I'm going to do it, but I'll do it. I still will bring this into the discussion because lots of times people in power, and this is just the Ron Thomas interpretation of that, they feel because they may have letters behind their name, and they feel they've figured it all out. And for someone else bringing a different viewpoint, no. This is the way it's going to be done. And this is why this is my thoughts, this is why we have so many challenges today.
Well, Ron, you just like apparently you're claiming that I'm stealing the words from your mouth. You're doing the same with me. Yeah. Well, what's that expression? Great minds, right? Great minds think alike, because you've identified what I think I've identified as well, which is that these problems that we talk about are universal, right? Because at the core of it, we're dealing with human beings who have problems, human beings who have challenges, and they're trying to figure out how to solve them, right? A lot of what we, look, you may not be dealing with people with lupus and figuring out how to diagnose and treat their lupus or diabetes or heart failure. Just like I'm not dealing with the problems that you're dealing with, right? The strategy and leadership. But at the core of it, and this is the lesson that I really learned pre-pandemic, before COVID-19 pandemic, there was the drug overdose epidemic. And the way that we tried to really send that message about addiction and evidence-based treatment and care was it's through science and storytelling. That's how you reduce the stigma that's associated with addiction. It's through science and storytelling. And in your case, in leadership fields in all sectors, I would recommend, yes, use the data as much as possible. Use data to drive your presentation, but connect that to stories of successful clients, stories of unsuccessful clients and customers, And how can we learn from that, the positives and the negatives from these stories, and combine that with data, and then move forward with whatever presentation or data, that point that you're trying to make.
Yeah. So when you said data, evidence based, I got to remember that because that's my key term when I talk to people that in the work that I do. So let's take a commercial break, and then we'll come back, and we have a few more questions to go before we close out.
Sounds good.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
And we're back. So, what is the most important leadership lesson you've learned over the course of your career?
Oh, what a great question. You know, it must sound cliched, Ron, but it really comes down to me, it's communication. And the most fundamental aspect of communication really is active listening. I think people brush off and underestimate listening, but listening is a very active process. It is rooted in intent. And that probably leads to, it ties in very closely with this concept of motivational interviewing. I think some of the most successful doctors, psychologists, therapists, counselors use motivational interviewing to effect change, a behavioral change. I really think it starts with listening to your own self, listening to your body, your mind, your heart, what your body is telling you, that sense of anxiety or that sense of discomfort. And then also really listening to what your patient, your client, your relative, what they're telling you, and frankly, what they're not telling you. Because listening is also about watching body language. A lot of things that my patients say, they're not actually saying, they're not verbally expressing. It's they're shifting in their chair, they're looking down, they're sighing, they're crying, the tears are swelling up. So I think that kind of observation and listening is about 90% of the battles. That and being intentional about what you want to do and how you want to do it. And particularly for women, girls, women, unfortunately, we face a lot of double standards. And just being angry and pissed off or just ignoring it and walking away, not going to solve any problem. So finding tactful, meaningful, but firm and effective ways of communicating, I think it goes a long way. I'd say that's one of key leadership skills that I take to heart.
Picked up over the years. I have so many notes because I always capture the things you say. I said, damn, I use that too. What you do and the patients you're dealing with, and you're saying the patients, you're listening to the patient. The metaphor I use, I'm a big Nat Geo fan. I'm big on documentaries and animals, but I noticed that when they talk about snakes, how the snake sticks his tongue out, and what they're doing, they're sensing what's happening. And I tell leaders, you need to read the room. You need to watch you said they look away from you, or they're thinking about, they don't make eye contact. That's a signals, and you have to be aware of that. You can't just ignore, and you only concentrate on the verbal, because motions, I may be uncomfortable when you ask me something. All of that you take in and you read and you sense from that.
Can I tell you, Ron, so much that I know today, I was not taught during medical school, during my years of intense training. It's been a lot of on-the-job experience. I'm going to guess you feel the same way, right? There's so much that you know today you didn't learn back in undergrad or like grad school.
No.
You learned from just on the job. Like, yeah, I have a medical degree. I trained in internal medicine, but the addiction stuff I learned later. But even more than that, learning about addiction medicine and the patients that, from that, it's all these other core, very key trainings and skills like motivational interviewing, management of aggressive behavior, de-escalation, all of these really trauma-informed care. You don't have to be a physician to benefit from all of these other trainings that I've been fortunate enough to learn. And what I recognize is that many other people in other industries and sectors do not know that. I mean, there's so much that I just take for granted. And again, I've said this before, Ron, I feel so blessed to be able to do what I do that I just really want to be able to share it with as many people as possible. Because at the end of the day, Ron, even though I see a lot of badness, I see a lot of people who are traumatized and abused, I also see a lot of hope and a lot of positivity and a lot of people who want to be well and want to do well. They just don't know. They just don't know how. They don't have the tools. They don't have the confidence. I say to my patients all the time, like, I am, because the patients will thank me. They'll say, "Oh, doctor, thank you so much. I'm alive today because of you." I kind of, first of all, I'm uncomfortable with their compliments, but I deflect that back, deservedly so, because I remind my patients, you did all the work. I was just your number one cheerleader, a coach. I'm a glorified coach with a few letters behind her name. But I think that's the hallmark of a good leader, to recognize the strengths in your clients, in your patients, and empower them.
My goal is to get us on the stage together and we tag team.
Yeah.
So when I saw Mina speakers, I'm thinking that I said, we pick a pretty good tag team because you use all my key. You use all mine. I use all yours. So it's a connectivity point to it. So one of the things you mentioned was about the learnings that has come about over your career. And, you can have the degrees, I have the degrees, I have all the certifications, but I learned more from my father growing up as a kid. My father was a small businessman, and sometimes I wish that he and my mother were around I learned more from them than all the so-called educated stuff, because I learned relationships. I learned the power of connecting with people. And if I had to look back on the grounded success, or if you want to call it success, it would be back to the learnings of sitting down when my father came in. He was a small businessman, and I'd listen to his stories. I'd listen to him talk about people and what he picked up. He said, if you're in a room, listen. He said, because the person that's doing all the talking, you can discount that. But listen to what everybody's saying. You always read the room. I never forgot that as a kid that was 11 or 12 years old.
First of all, your father clearly raised a fantastic son, and I can see why, because of the brilliant, sagely advice. There's so many things I took for granted as a kid, Ron. It didn't really. And that makes sense. Most of when you're a kid, you complain, you're kind of ticked off at your mom and dad because of the strict rules, but it wasn't really, again, until I started taking care of a lot of homeless and vulnerable patients who did not have the same strong, supportive support system that I had. You don't appreciate it when you're like in it. I still have a very loving mother and father who provided a roof over my head, provided food, strong education. My mother bought extra math books. Here's this woman who immigrated from India to Toronto, Canada, didn't know a soul, but she asked the other mothers and parents, hey, are there stores or bookstores where I can get extra books? And when you're a dumb kid like I am, 6, 7 years old, you come home from school, your mom says, here, you have more homework. I'm like, okay. But my mother recognized at a young age, my mom and dad both, that education was the core, the key to any future success. That combined with the skills as your dad taught you about listening, my mom and dad taught me how to treat people well, how to be respectful, how to, respect your elderlies, but just be good to everyone. Because certainly in Hinduism, the way that my mom and dad are raised, there's God in everybody. So you treat everyone well. Now, later on, I learned that doesn't mean that you should be on the receiving end of abuse and manipulation, because they also taught me to be firm and confident and protect myself and defend myself, right? But those core skills of just being good and decent, which, by the way, is easier said than done, but that's when mindfulness kind of comes in. But those were fundamental, foundational years of my life.
That is absolutely awesome. You talked about your parents and the influence they had in growing up, and you kind of grasped onto that as a child, and it's carrying you to the point you're at today. So what I'm gathering is that you're bestowing that on the next level. That could be patience. That could be someone you're mentoring as a young person who's thinking about going to medical school. So how are you carrying that forward? I think the term is paying it back. How are you paying that back to?
Yeah. So let me also be very clear. I also recognize that I'm blessed and not everyone has that same upbringing, right? I'll use my patients as an example as well. I've had many, many patients who came from abusive households, who came from broken families, who, for whatever reason, they did not have that same foundation of support. But what I remind people is that support, that sense of connection can come from anywhere. Many of my patients, their adopted family, their families are the men and women that they meet when they're on the streets, when they're under a bridge, when they're in a shelter. Those are the people that they formed connection with and trust. So what I tell the future generation, I tell people that the key in really doing well and being happy is strong connections, strong relationships. They could be with your brother and sister. It could be with your colleague who sits in the next cubicle. It could be with the people that you meet at your chess club or book club. I don't care, Ron. Find somebody, one or two people who just have your back, and create that sense of support. Because look what COVID-19 showed us, right? It showed us what a lot of doctors already knew, which is without strong support and connection, it's certainly taught what a lot of addiction medicine doctors knew. Because a common thing in my field is the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Right? So a leading risk factor to substance use and relapse or return to use is isolation. It's disruption in connection. It's a feeling of isolation and despair. And that's when people feel so lonely and ashamed, that's when they feel like they feel hopeless, and drugs, alcohol, it takes away that pain and suffering. So that's what I instill in everyone. Find somebody who you trust and who you can talk to, and let that support drive you and strengthen your resolve.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for making time for the CEO series. And this is why I said in the beginning, we bring interesting people in that talks about different things, careers, and how they get to the point they're at now. If you're in New York, if you're watching I think it's the NBC channel, you're probably going to see her on TV because she's one of the noted commentators as it relates to that. So thank you so much. And we were going to meet in week after next in New York for lunch or dinner, whichever one, because we got to talk about. Hang on for a minute as we close out.
Will do. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, thank you.